All right, we're back and we are in emerging adulthood, and we're going to talk about the tendency for risk taking. Now, we talked a little bit about risk taking increasing in adolescence, and that is for sure that kids start to have, this invincibility fallacy where, nothing bad will happen to them. And so it persists for sure into emerging adulthood. So in this graphic, on the orange line, what you're seeing is the fatal accidents that occur per 1 million miles driven for the different age groups. And then in the green bar, you see fatal accidents per 10,000 drivers in those age groups. And so you do see that, the oldest drivers and the youngest drivers tend to have the most accidents. And, really the youngest drivers encapsulate emerging adults, where they're getting better with experience, right? But the 16 to 19-year-old phase includes the 18 and 19-year-olds who are emerging adults, and then we got the 20 to 24 years. You don't really see a drop-off in fatal accidents per 100,000 miles driven or fatal accidents per 10,000 drivers of that age group. You really don't see a drop-off until about age 25. Now, if you break this out by sex, you'll see that it actually drops sooner for women than it does for men. Which is why men tend to have higher insurance than women until the men turn 25, because they are much riskier drivers and much more likely to have a fatal car accident. So younger, emerging adults tend to take more risks. They drive faster, they tailgate, they dart in and out among different cars, they text while they drive, they hang out the door while they drive. They do something I just saw on a World's Dumbest TV show where they try and stand on the seat of their motorcycle and not hold on to the handlebars while the motorcycle is driving. Spoiler alert, that didn't work out well. So they just do a lot more risky things while driving, and that can contribute to these fatal accidents. Here we have visits to the hospital. And on the y-axis, it says per 10,000 people in that age group. What you're seeing is they broke it down by race, so that's the different colored bars. But if we just sort of look at the 16 to 24, which encompasses the age group that we're talking about, a little bit of adolescence still in there. But you'll see that the bars are the highest. If you were to average them all out, the bars are the highest there for the 16 to 24-year-olds to be admitted to the hospital for an accident because they engage in more risky behaviors. Now, you'll notice that the non-Hispanic blacks persist in pretty high rates into, until they're age 40, 44 really. But the worst time for accidents for everybody is 16 to 24 because they risk take. So this is the most likely age to have unprotected sex. And by that I mean not using condoms. I don't mean not using birth control. I mean not using condoms. They are the age group that's most likely to carry guns, the most likely to drive without their seatbelts, and then the most likely to try addictive drugs. I had to look up that drive without seatbelts thing when I saw it in the textbook. I was like, no way, people don't drive without their seatbelts these days. And I looked it up, and in fact, they are the most likely age group to drive without their seatbelts. So apparently I was wrong. So let's give some concrete examples of risks that people in this age group tend to take. A lot of times they're willing to work in what we call edge work jobs that are risky. The cast of Deadliest Catch is populated by 18 to 25-year-olds who are working the deck. A very dangerous job, but it pays really well. And so, you can put in a few months of really hard, really risky labor and have a bunch of money at the end. It seems like a good payoff to an 18 to 24-year-old. They're willing to do the kinds of jobs that, older people oftentimes won't do, climbing high. Prostitutes tend to be 18 to 25 years old. Now, not exclusively. You could have younger prostitutes and you can have much older prostitutes. But the average age is 18 to 25. And part of that has to do with that invincibility fallacy, like nothing bad will happen to me. There are a bunch of other factors that go into prostitution, by the way. So if you really want to know any more about that, please take my human sexuality class. We go into a lot more detail on the issues surrounding prostitution. So please don't take my very brief presentation as a complete one. Joining the military, really common between 18 and 25 years old, right? It's a very risky job, but you kind of join it with a mindset that the bad things won't happen to you, right? Like you count on it, that there won't be a war, that if there is a war, you don't have to go, or if you do have to go, nothing will happen to you, right? Most bull riders are between 18 and 25 years old. Most people who compete in the X Games are between 18 and 25 years old. That, it's really impressive when you have like a 16-year-old, or you have somebody who's oh gosh, grandpa's over here, he's 30. Tony Hawk can still do some stuff, but Tony Hawk doesn't do what Tony Hawk used to do, right? 18 to 25 is the time for these kinds of edge work careers. Also, participation in all sorts of extreme sports tend to be the purview of the 18 to 25-year-old. Now, some people will start it when they're 18 to 25, and they'll continue doing it well past the age of 25. But it's most common to see these kinds of really risky things being done by people in this age group. I had a really hard time finding any extreme sport pictures that featured women. So I got a scuba diving one, which is considered an extreme sport. That it's clearly a woman, but on average, the males are going to be more risky in their work and more risky in their leisure time activities than females are on average. That is not to say that there's not a woman who's listening to me right now who's a snowboarder or a rock climber. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying that on average. The riskiness tends to tilt towards the males on average. But for females, this is their best time for trying out risky stuff. That's for sure. If they're going to try it, it'll probably be during this age group. Another risky thing that happens during emerging adulthood is the use of different kinds of drugs. So you'll notice that the use of illicit drugs, which is depicted in the blue bar, peaks in young adulthood in the 18 to 25-year-old category and drops off steeply into regular adulthood. So yeah, you do still find people in their 40s and 50s who are using illicit drugs, but it's much less common than you would expect in 18 to 25-year-olds. But then if we look at tobacco products and alcohol products, what we see is that it peaks and then it stays pretty stable. And in fact, for tobacco, it might be even a little higher, but that might be an artifact of this being a cross-sectional study. And so those people who were 26 to 34 at the time they were surveyed may have started when they were younger and continued, and it's less likely for today's 18 to 25-year-olds to have started than today's 26 to 34-year-olds. Like with every 10 years, we have fewer and fewer people starting smoking. But if you include vaping as a tobacco product, we're going to see this number going up for the 18 to 25-year-olds because vaping has gotten very popular and it's very addictive, and people will be doing it just like they used to do with actual tobacco. The point, though, is that with the tobacco and the alcohol, that people tend to persist with those a little bit longer than you see them doing with the illicit drugs. And so, throughout what I used to call young adulthood, right up to 35, you see alcohol and tobacco being used, and then it starts to decline through middle life. So drug use is another example of the riskiness that the person's willing to do, because these are risky behaviors, but you have to say to yourself, it's not going to be harmful to me, right? So a little bit of that invincibility fallacy is still present, where it's, I've heard about ODs, but it's not going to happen to me. I've heard about people getting what they thought was a Xanax on the black market, and then it turned out to be fentanyl and it killed them. I've heard about that, but it's not going to happen to me. And so you're still willing to take that risk. And that's, going to start to wane after the age of 25, where people are willing to take that risk with the illicit drugs. With the alcohol and the tobacco, that's a much more social stuff. It's not as much of, with the illicit, it has all the illegality about it, all those kinds of, you don't know where this is coming from. It's much more risky behavior than buying alcohol or buying a tobacco product that's all, regulated and packaged and a known entity. And so there's a little bit less risk taking associated with tobacco and alcohol, I think, than with illicit drug use. Now, if we want to take it to its next step, though, with alcohol, you're talking about now the risky behavior of a person consuming alcohol and then driving, or consuming alcohol and then making decisions about sexual behavior that could be, very risky decisions, having sex with a stranger or without any kind of birth control or any kind of condom. People can make really poor decisions while under the influence of alcohol. So it does have that component of riskiness, right? And then, of course, you might be thinking to yourself, well, tobacco products give you cancer. Well, for sure. But of course, that's a problem for future risk taker to worry about, right? Like, I'm doing what feels good and I want to be doing right now. And someday in the future, I might have to deal with the repercussions of what I'm doing right now. But that's definitely a problem for the future. And a person who's 18 to 25 doesn't think about that as much. That's, the premise that someday I'm going to have gray hair is so off in the future that it doesn't even impact the decision that's being made by an 18 to 25-year-old, for sure. And that's what we mean by this risk-taking behavior. All right, well, that concludes our foray through the biology of emerging adulthood. I will see you for the next section, which will be the cognitive development of the emerging adult. See you later.